There is a village nestled between the towering dunes of the Arabian desert, a place scorched by the sun during the day and chilled by the wind at night. It is a village that time forgot, where the customs of old still persist and the superstitions of ancient times still hold sway. Here, among the shifting sands, the Jinn are more than just stories. They are a looming presence, feared and respected in equal measure. The story begins with Khalid, a young man who had always dismissed the tales of the Jinn as mere folklore. Khalid was different from the rest of his village. Educated in the city, he had returned to his ancestral home only after his father's sudden death. Khalid was practical, a man of science, and found the village's rigid adherence to superstition suffocating. His father had raised him to think critically, and now that he was gone, Khalid was left with the task of overseeing the family's farm, a duty he resented. It was during a particularly harsh drought that the events began. The village's well, the only reliable source of water, had dried up. The villagers whispered that the land had been cursed, that the Jinn who resided in the dunes had grown angry with them for venturing too far into their domain. Khalid scoffed at these suggestions, but desperation drove him to explore the desert, searching for a new source of water. He would do anything to save the farm, even if it meant traveling further than anyone in the village dared. The night before his departure, his mother warned him. "Khalid," she said, her voice trembling, "the Jinn are not like us. They live in the spaces between our world and theirs, and they do not like to be disturbed." Khalid nodded, but his eyes revealed his disbelief. "Mother, please, there are no such things as Jinn. This drought is because of the weather, not some spirit's vengeance." "Still," his mother insisted, pressing a small, worn talisman into his hand. "Take this with you," she said. "It's an amulet passed down through our family. It will protect you." Khalid didn't argue. He simply pocketed the talisman to appease her and went to bed, determined to begin his journey at first light. The desert was a vast, inhospitable place. The sun burned mercilessly during the day, and the nights were filled with eerie silence, broken only by the occasional howl of wind sweeping across the dunes. On the third night, Khalid found himself far beyond any place he had ever traveled before. The dunes seemed to stretch endlessly in every direction, and the stars above provided little comfort as the cold set in. He had set up a small camp, and as he huddled next to a dying fire, he noticed something strange. A distant glow on the horizon, faint but unmistakable. It was unlike anything he had ever seen in the desert before. It pulsed gently like a heartbeat and seemed to beckon him closer. Despite a growing sense of unease, Khalid felt compelled to investigate. He packed his things and made his way toward the light, walking for what felt like hours. As he drew nearer, the glow resolved into a strange sight. A ruined city, half buried beneath the sand, its ancient towers rising from the dunes like skeletal fingers. This was no place Khalid had ever heard of, not in any book or story. The architecture was foreign, alien, and though it was clearly ancient, the light that emanated from it was alive, pulsating with an unnatural energy. Khalid wandered through the ruins, marveling at the eerie beauty of the place, but as he walked, he began to feel something else, something watching him. At first, he dismissed it as nerves, but the feeling grew stronger with each step. He could feel eyes on him, unseen but present, and the air seemed to grow thicker, heavier. Then came the whispers. They started as barely perceptible murmurs, carried on the wind. At first, they were indistinguishable from the sound of the shifting sands, but soon they became clear, voices speaking in a language Khalid did not understand. He paused, looking around, but there was no one there. The city was empty, a desolate shell of its former self, and yet the whispers persisted. "Leave this place," they seemed to say, though the words were distorted like echoes from a dream. "You do not belong here." Khalid's heart raced, but he pressed on, his curiosity outweighing his fear. He wandered deeper into the ruins, the glow intensifying with each step, until he found himself standing before a massive, ornate door carved into the side of a crumbling palace. The door was adorned with strange symbols, unlike anything Khalid had ever seen before, symbols that seemed to shift and writhe as he looked at them. He hesitated for only a moment before pushing the door open. Inside was a vast chamber, dimly lit by the same ethereal glow that filled the city. In the center of the room stood a tall, shadowy figure, its form barely discernible in the flickering light. Khalid froze, his breath catching in his throat. The figure was not human. Its proportions were all wrong, too elongated, too thin, and its eyes glowed with a faint, sickly light. "You have come far, mortal," the figure said, its voice a rasping whisper that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "Why have you disturbed our sanctuary?" Khalid's mouth was dry, and his mind raced. I'm looking for water," he stammered. "My village. We are dying. The well is dry." The figure tilted its head, considering him. "Water," it repeated, the word dripping with disdain. "You humans are always wanting, always needing, but what will you give in return for what you seek?" Khalid swallowed hard. "I have nothing to offer," he admitted. "I am only a man." The figure's eyes narrowed and the whispers grew louder, more insistent. "Then perhaps you should leave this place," it hissed, "before you lose more than you are willing to give." But Khalid could not turn back now. "Please," he begged, "there must be something I can do, something I can give." The figure was silent for a long moment. Then it reached out a long, bony hand, its fingers like claws. "Very well," it said. "I will grant you what you seek. But know this, mortal, the Jinn do not give freely. What is given must be repaid." Before Khalid could respond, the figure reached out and touched his forehead. A searing pain shot through his skull, and the world around him dissolved into darkness. When Khalid awoke, he was lying in the sand just outside the ruins. The city was gone, as if it had never existed, and the only trace of his encounter was a strange, crescent-shaped scar on his forehead. In his hand, he clutched a small vial of water, its contents shimmering with an unnatural light. He returned to the village, the vial clutched tightly in his hand. The water it contained was more than enough to fill the well, and within days, the village flourished once more. Crops grew, the animals thrived, and the people rejoiced. Khalid was hailed as a hero, the man who had saved them all. But the whispers never left him. At night, as he lay in his bed, Khalid could hear them just as he had in the ruins. They were quieter now, more subtle, but they were always there, just at the edge of his consciousness. And as the days turned to weeks, he began to notice other things, strange occurrences that defied explanation. Shadows moved on their own, objects disappeared only to reappear in strange places. And always, there were the whispers, growing louder with each passing day. Then one night they came for him. It was a night like any other, the village quiet under the watchful gaze of the moon. Khalid had just drifted off to sleep when he was jolted awake by a loud crash. He sat up, heart pounding, and saw the shadowy figure from the ruins standing at the foot of his bed, its eyes glowing with a malevolent light. "You have taken from us," it hissed. "Now it is time to repay." Khalid scrambled back, terror gripping him. "No," he whispered, "I didn't mean to." But the figure was already advancing, its form shifting and twisting as it loomed over him. The whispers grew deafening, a cacophony of voices that filled the room, and Khalid could feel his mind unraveling under the weight of them. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. The figure was gone, the room silent once more. But Khalid was no longer alone. Standing at the foot of his bed was a child, a boy, no more than 6 or 7 years old, with eyes that glowed faintly in the darkness. The boy smiled, but there was something wrong with it, something too wide, too sharp. "You are ours now," the boy said, his voice a perfect mimicry of the shadowy figure's rasping whisper. "And we will not be denied." Khalid screamed, but no one heard him. The village slept on, unaware of the horror that had befallen him, and as the night wore on, the whispers continued, a constant reminder of the debt that could never be repaid. For Khalid, there was no escape. The Jinn had claimed him, body and soul, and now he would wander the desert forever, a lost spirit, a warning to those who dared to disturb the ancient powers that dwelled beneath the sands. The village never saw him again, but on certain nights when the wind howled through the dunes, the villagers swore they could hear his screams, carried on the wind like a distant echo, and they knew the Jinn had taken